Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we will have a complete overview and teardown of the Elgato 4K 60S Plus, which is an interesting capture card with a lot of potential. For you guys that don't know, this is a capture card that you can use for recording your gameplays or anything else, basically in two ways. First, configuring it with your preferred software, connecting the card into the PC with a USB 3.0 port. It works fine with OBS, although there are some latency settings to change, but it will record or stream if you want, without any issue, while allowing you to have a pass-through of 4K at 60Hz. You can use also the Elgato 4K capture utility, in case you don't want to use OBS. It has some customizations on the settings, but with a lot of things missing. We will talk about that in a minute. The second way you can use it is in a standalone mode. Thanks to the dedicated hardware encoder, you can use it in a standalone mode, recording all the footage, gameplays and whatever else into the SD card. You have to connect the HDMI source, insert the SD card and press the rec button. Link in the description for more info about the SD card specs and settings. The file recorded in the second case can be a maximum of 4K at 60 FPS. I have to say that the quality of the footage is okay, but sometimes after 1 hour or 2 hours of use, you will notice some deterioration of the quality, some stuttering. I believe this is due to the thermal throttling of the components inside, though this won't be a video on how you can set up the device for recording and streaming in different scenarios. There are a lot of reviews and videos out there on how to do that, including some useful help pages from Elgato, which I will leave the links down in the description. With that said, the Elgato 4K 60S Plus isn't exactly that much loved from streamers and content creators, and a lot of people had different issues and problems with both modes, standalone and PC connected. Considering the price of $400, is that because the card itself has mediocre hardware or because it isn't optimized as it should be? I believe that is the second case. So let's tear down and have a full overview on what's inside and if all the hardware is adequate for what this capture card is supposed to do. Alright guys, before going ahead with the teardown, I wanted to say that this video isn't sponsored by anyone. So I would appreciate if you hit that like button in case you like this content. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. It doesn't cost anything to you, but it will help grow the channel and allow me to bring more content like this. Thank you so much. After removing the 4 screws underneath, it is possible to remove the upper cover, and once removed, what we can see is an aluminum heatsink with a thermal pad on it to dissipate the heat from the memory module especially and the dedicated encoder chip. Once removed the heatsink, we will have the board itself. As a first look, let's check the most important piece here, which is the hardware for video encoding when used, especially in standalone mode. What Elgato uses here is a version of the Umbrella H2 chip, which as we can see is capable of encoding 4K at 60 FPS in HDR. This is a good hardware encoder in my opinion, and for the purpose used here is a high-end choice. Moving to the memory modules, there are 4 modules all placed around the encoder chip. Those are DDR3L SDRAMs, specifically one version of the Micron D9 SHD. I didn't find any datasheet for this specific model code, but seems to be 512 MB for a total of 2 gigs DDR3L SDRAM, with a frequency of 1866 MHz, which I think is okay. Moving next, we have the FPGA Xilinx Arctic 7. These are the Xilinx, for you guys who don't know it. AMD has acquired the Xilinx a few months ago. Let's say this is the equivalent of a CPU in a PC. The one used here is a version of the XC7A15T, which is okay for what is meant to be used. I believe this will be mostly used when the capture card is in PC connected mode. Next to the Xilinx Arctic 7, there is the HDMI bridge. This is a version of the Socionext MN869121. It supports only HDMI 2.0 and is useful for color conversion, and most likely is used when the card is switching between SDR and HDR content, but also for upscaling and downscaling. It seems that it can support also 1440p, but Elgato didn't implement it as a resolution while recording and either as a pass-through. So strange, considering that a lot of people might want to use it in a standalone mode, recording gameplays or other things from Xbox Series X or PS5 in a 1440p. Moving on the back of the board, there is not so much going on here, except for a couple of interesting things. One of them is a NAND flash of 2 GB. This is a version of the Winbond W29N02GVSIAA, enough for what might be reading some settings, drivers and firmware. Next to the NAND flash, there is the hardware audio codec. This audio codec is the Cyrus CS42L51, which is a 24-bit 96Hz stereo codec. Not bad, and it will do all the audio recording pretty well. So that was an overview on what is the most important hardware on the Elgato 4K60S Plus. We can tell that most of the components are high-end choices and capable of great results. The encoder chip, which is the most important part here, but also the FPGA module and the memory modules are really good. The question here is why this capture card hasn't been popular and the best in its category while having all this potential? Well, some answers are simple in my opinion. One of them is hardware optimization. Some strange choices like the lack of 1440p compatibility or the lack of internal battery. In that way the device can have the right time and date. Another thing is the support for high frame rates pass-through, and I believe the most important of those answers is software support and optimization. The 4K capture utility doesn't offer full control of settings on the capture card. For example, you can enable the stream link to make it compatible with OBS, and there is the 1440p option, but you can't have a pass-through of 1440p. That is really strange. The picture color settings are useful somehow, but you can't manage the contrast or colors properly, but eventually you have to do that in post-production. Then the recording format. You can change it. It has to match the source input, which is limiting a lot. Let's say you have a 4K source and you want to keep it that way because you want to have that resolution on your TV or monitor as a pass-through, but you want to record the gameplay or whatever else in a 1440p or 1080p for saving space and so on, whatever you want. Well, you can't do that, which is so weird considering that the hardware inside the capture card itself can handle all that. Well, those were the settings if you want to record in a PC connected mode. But what if you want to record in a standalone mode? Well, changing settings is so awkward. You have to connect the SD card to your computer and you have to use a text file that is stored inside the SD card, like the old-fashioned way. Again, the device has all the potential to do it in another way. There are other small things like heat dissipation, because this thing gets really hot, and the touch button, which someone doesn't like it, but personally that's not an issue to me. The Elgato 4K60S Plus could have been a game changer because the idea of recording in a standalone mode is really useful for people who want to record gameplays or whatever else without having to connect everything to a desktop or notebook. The included hardware video encoder is a good choice and a high quality. This device is now more than 2 years old, and if Elgato decides to release the Mark II of the 4K60S Plus, here are my thoughts on what they should include. First of all, a pass-through in 4K at 144 Hz, in 1440p 240 Hz, and in 1080p 360 Hz. The recording should be in 4K or in 1440p and in 1080p at least at 144 FPS. That will be definitely a killer feature. And instead of an SD card, at least the new device eventually should have a 512 gigs internal storage. That will be one of the most killer features in my opinion. Then kind of battery solution for not having issues when you record the videos with the time and date. The software interface, as a last thing but not the less important, should give more control on the device, including more flexibility on colors, scaling, upscaling, and audio settings, and other controls. These are some of the main things that in my opinion Elgato should implement on the next generation of the 4K60S Plus, and maybe try to keep the price between 350 and 400. I believe that most of the streamers and content creators, including myself in the first place, will buy it on day one. That's all for this video, guys. If you liked it and find it interesting, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications. Thanks for watching.